The woman they called Broken Grace was freezing to death on her own porch when she heard the horse collapse in the snow. Beatrice Crawford wrapped her threadbare shawl tighter around her shoulders and squinted through the blizzard that had descended on Deadwood, South Dakota, like divine punishment. January of 1878 was proving to be one of the cruelest winters the Black Hills had ever seen. And for a woman already shunned by decent society, it felt like the final nail in a coffin she had been building for years. The sound came again, a heavy thud followed by labored breathing, and despite every instinct telling her to stay inside where her meager fire still burned, Beatrice stepped off her porch into knee-deep snow. The cold bit through her worn dress immediately, stealing what little warmth she had managed to gather. Her cabin sat at the edge of town, far enough that respectable folk did not have to look at her when they passed by, close enough that their judgment reached her doorstep daily. She had lived in this exile for 3 years now, ever since the truth about her father came out, ever since the town decided that the sins of a thief and a drunk should fall squarely on the shoulders of his only daughter. Through the white curtain of falling snow, Beatrice could barely make out the dark shape of a horse lying on its side, steam rising from its nostrils. Beside it, a figure in a long coat was trying to stand, failing, trying again. The man made it to his knees before collapsing forward into the snow. She should leave him there. That was what any sensible person would do. A strange man appearing in a blizzard meant nothing but trouble, and trouble was something Beatrice Crawford had in abundance already. But even as these thoughts crossed her mind, her feet were moving forward, pushing through the drifts, her hands already reaching for him. He was unconscious when she grabbed his arm, his face pale as death beneath a coating of ice. His lips had gone blue, and his breathing came in shallow gasps that barely fogged the air. He was tall, much taller than her, and solidly built beneath the frozen leather of his coat. Getting him to the cabin would be nearly impossible, but leaving him to die was not something Beatrice could do, no matter how much the town had tried to freeze the compassion out of her. She hooked her arms under his shoulders and pulled. He did not move. She braced her feet, leaned back, and pulled again. This time he slid a few inches through the snow. Her muscles screamed in protest, her lungs burned with cold air, but she pulled again and again, dragging him inch by painful inch toward her porch. The horse lifted its head once, watching her with dark eyes, then lay back down in resignation. By the time she got him up the 3 steps to her porch, Beatrice was sobbing with effort, her tears freezing on her cheeks. By the time she dragged him through her door, she had no feeling left in her fingers or toes. She kicked the door shut behind them and let him drop beside her fire, then collapsed against the wall, gasping. For several long minutes, she could do nothing but breathe and try to stop shaking. The fire crackled merrily, oblivious to the drama unfolding in its warm circle of light. Finally, Beatrice forced herself to move. She crawled over to the man and began working at the buttons of his coat with numb fingers. The leather was frozen stiff, the buttons like ice, but she persisted until she got it open. Underneath, his shirt was soaked through with melted snow and sweat. She could feel him shivering even though he remained unconscious, his body fighting a battle his mind had already surrendered. Beatrice knew about hypothermia from long winters of barely scraping by. She knew that wet clothes would kill him as surely as leaving him outside, and she knew what she had to do even though her own face burned with embarrassment at the thought. She stripped him down to his underthings, trying not to look too closely at the body she was revealing, trying not to notice the scars that crisscrossed his chest and back like a map of violence. She grabbed every blanket she owned, all 3 of them, and wrapped him as tightly as she could. Then she built up the fire until it roared, feeding it precious wood from her dwindling supply. Only when he was as comfortable as she could make him did Beatrice allow herself to change out of her own wet clothes. Shivering behind the blanket she had hung to divide her one-room cabin, she pulled on her only other dress, a faded calico that had been her mother's, and wrapped herself in the shawl again. Her teeth would not stop chattering. The wind howled outside, shaking the cabin walls. The blizzard was getting worse. Beatrice looked at the man sleeping by her fire and wondered what she had brought into her home. His face, now that the ice had melted away, was handsome in a hard sort of way, all sharp angles and stern lines. He looked to be in his middle 20s, perhaps 5 or 6 years older than her own 21 years. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and several days' worth of stubble shadowed his jaw. She should search his belongings, see if he carried anything that might identify him. But his coat and saddlebags were still outside, and she could not bring herself to venture into that cold again just yet. Instead, she made herself a weak cup of coffee from ground she had already used twice before and sat watching him breathe. The hours passed slowly. The storm raged on. Twice she went outside to check on the horse, bringing it what little hay she had stored in her lean-to and covering it with a canvas tarp. The animal was tougher than its rider, already back on its feet and grateful for the shelter of Beatrice's porch overhang. It was nearly midnight when the man finally stirred. Beatrice had been dozing in her chair, the cold seeping through the walls despite the fire, when she heard him groan. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then sharpening as they landed on her face. "Easy," Beatrice said softly, leaning forward. "You are safe. You collapsed in the snow outside my cabin." He tried to sit up, winced, and fell back. His voice when he spoke was rough like gravel underfoot. "The horse. Alive. On my porch out of the worst of the wind." He closed his eyes briefly, relief evident on his features. When he opened them again, they were a startling shade of blue, like summer sky in the midst of winter. "Thank you." Beatrice shrugged, uncomfortable with gratitude. She was not used to it. Any Christian would have done the same. "No," he said, and there was something dark in his tone that made her look at him more closely. "They would not have." They sat in silence for a moment, the only sound the crackling fire and the howling wind. Finally, Beatrice rose and ladled some soup from the pot she kept perpetually simmering. It was more water than substance, a few withered vegetables and a ham bone she had been using for a week, but it was hot and it was food. She helped him sit up, noting how weak he still was, and held the cup while he drank. He finished it in long gulps, then leaned back against the wall with a sigh. "What is your name?" Beatrice asked. He hesitated, and in that hesitation she understood something important. This man was running from something or someone. His eyes shifted away from hers, and when he spoke, she knew he was deciding whether or not to trust her. "Wade," he said finally. "Wade Sullivan." "I am Beatrice Crawford," she replied, "though most folks around here just call me Trouble and leave it at that." Something like a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Trouble is a name I know well." Over the next 3 days, the blizzard kept them trapped together in Beatrice's small cabin. Wade Sullivan improved slowly, regaining his strength through careful nursing and what little food Beatrice could spare. She learned that he had been riding north from Wyoming when the storm caught him, that he was looking for work on one of the big ranches up near Spearfish. She learned that he was 26 years old, that he had no family to speak of, and that he was careful never to talk about where he had been before Wyoming. She did not press him. She understood secrets. She understood the need to leave the past buried. In turn, Wade learned about her life in Deadwood, about the father who had stolen from nearly everyone in town before drinking himself into an early grave 2 years back, about the mother who had died when Beatrice was 15, leaving her alone to face the consequences of her father's actions. About the way the shopkeepers charged her double for goods, how the church ladies crossed the street rather than acknowledge her existence, how even the soiled doves who worked in the saloons looked down on her because at least their shame was honest. Why stay? Wade asked on the second night, watching her mend a tear in his shirt by firelight. Why not leave this place and start fresh somewhere else? Beatrice's needle paused in its work. This cabin was my mother's. It is all I have left of her. And besides, I have no money for travel. I take in mending when I can get it, do washing for the hotel sometimes. It keeps me in wood and flour barely. That is not living, Wade said quietly. That is just surviving. Sometimes surviving is enough. On the third day, the blizzard finally broke. Weak sunlight filtered through the clouds, and the wind died to occasional gusts. Wade insisted he was well enough to leave, though Beatrice could see he was still weak. She had packed what little food she could spare into his saddlebags when someone pounded on her door. Beatrice froze, her heart suddenly hammering. She rarely had visitors, and none of them were ever friendly. Wade must have seen something in her face because he stood, moving closer despite his unsteady legs. The pounding came again, harder this time. "Open up, Beatrice. We know you are in there." She recognized the voice. Marcus Thornton, the blacksmith's son, a bully who had made her life miserable since childhood. With trembling hands, Beatrice opened the door. 3 men stood on her porch, Marcus in front with 2 of his friends flanking him. Their eyes were hard, their faces flushed with cold and something else, something that made Beatrice's stomach turn. "We saw the horse," Marcus said, pushing past her into the cabin. "Figured you might have company. Did not expect you would be whoring already, though it makes sense. Like father, like daughter, I suppose." "Get out of my home," Beatrice said, her voice shaking but firm. Marcus laughed, a cruel sound that echoed off the walls. Then his eyes landed on Wade and his expression changed. The color drained from his face so quickly that Beatrice thought he might faint. "You," Marcus whispered. Wade said nothing. He simply stood there, still shirtless, his hand resting casually near his gun belt that lay across Beatrice's table. But there was nothing casual about the way his eyes had gone cold as winter ice. "Boys," Marcus said, backing toward the door. "We should go." "What?" one of his friends protested. "But we just got here." "Now," Marcus snapped, and there was genuine fear in his voice. "We are leaving now." They fled, stumbling over each other in their haste to get out the door. Beatrice stood frozen, unable to comprehend what had just happened. When she finally turned to look at Wade, he was pulling his shirt on, his face carefully neutral. "What was that about?" she asked. "Nothing." "That was not nothing. That man looked at you like he had seen a ghost." Wade finished buttoning his shirt and reached for his coat, which had been drying by the fire. "Some ghosts are best left undisturbed, Miss Crawford." "Miss Crawford," Beatrice repeated, hurt creeping into her voice. "After 3 days, we are back to formalities." He paused, his back to her, shoulders tense. When he spoke, his voice was low. "I should go. The storm has passed, and I have already imposed on your hospitality far too long. Wade." She crossed to him, placed a hand on his arm. "Whatever it is, whatever you are running from, it does not matter to me. You are welcome here." He turned then, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. There was longing there, and regret, and something deeper that she could not name. "That is the kindest thing anyone has said to me in 5 years, he said softly. "But you do not know what you are offering. If I stay, if anyone finds out who I really am, it will make your life even harder than it already is." "Who are you really?" Wade was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn soft with age and handling. He unfolded it and held it out to her. It was a wanted poster. The face drawn on it was rougher than the man standing before her, younger and harder, but unmistakably Wade. Beneath the picture, bold letters proclaimed, "Wade Sullivan, wanted for bank robbery. $500 reward." Beatrice stared at the poster, then at Wade, then back at the poster. She should be afraid. She should throw him out, maybe even turn him in for that reward money that could change her life. Instead, she felt something else entirely. Understanding, perhaps. Recognition. 5 years ago, Wade said, taking the poster back and folding it carefully, I was young and stupid and fell in with the wrong crowd. We robbed a bank in Cheyenne. No one was hurt, but that does not make it right. I took my share of the money and ran, spent the next 2 years looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. Been trying to stay clean ever since, moving from place to place, taking honest work when I can get it. But that poster follows me. Someone always recognizes me eventually. Is that why Marcus ran? His uncle is a marshal down in Wyoming. Probably showed him a stack of these posters at some point. Beatrice walked to her table and sat down heavily. Her whole life, she had been judged for her father's sins, condemned for actions that were not her own. And here was a man who had actually done something wrong, who was guilty of the crime he carried, and yet she felt no desire to judge him at all. "How much money do you have left?" she asked. The question clearly surprised him. "I spent most of it the first year being foolish. Maybe $100 left, hidden in my saddlebags. And you have been moving from place to place for 5 years, never settling, never putting down roots." "Yes. That sounds even worse than surviving." Despite everything, Wade laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if he did not use it often, but genuine. "I suppose it does." Beatrice looked up at him, this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had been too afraid to speak. "Stay," she said. "Beatrice, the storm may have passed, but winter has not. You are still weak from nearly freezing to death. Stay at least until spring. Help me around the cabin, chop wood, fix the roof before the next snow. I have a lean-to that could be made into a decent shelter for your horse. We can figure out the rest as we go. If anyone recognizes me, then we will deal with it. But Wade, you saved my life just by being here when Marcus came to my door. I saw how he looked at you, how fast he ran. Maybe your reputation can serve some good for once." He stared at her, and she could see him wrestling with the decision. Part of him clearly wanted to run, to keep moving as he had for 5 years. But another part, a part that had been buried under guilt and fear and loneliness, was reaching for what she offered like a drowning man reaching for a rope. "Just until spring," he said finally. Beatrice smiled, really smiled for the first time in longer than she could remember. Just until spring. But as winter deepened and January gave way to February, it became clear that spring was very far away indeed. The blizzard that had brought Wade to her door was only the first of many. Snow piled up around the cabin until the windows were half buried, and the wind howled through the Black Hills like a living thing. Wade proved his worth a dozen times over in those first weeks. He fixed the roof where it had been leaking, reinforcing the shingles against the weight of snow. He built a proper stable for his horse next to Beatrice's lean-to, insulating the walls with mud and grass. He chopped wood until they had a supply that would last through until spring, stacking it neatly under a tarp where it would stay dry. And slowly, so slowly that Beatrice almost did not notice it happening, the town's attitude toward her began to shift. Not much, not enough to call it acceptance, but enough to breathe a little easier. The shopkeeper no longer charged her double when Wade came with her to town, his presence a silent reminder that she was not entirely alone. The church ladies still crossed the street, but they no longer whispered quite so loudly. Even Marcus Thornton gave them a wide berth. his eyes fixed firmly on the ground whenever they passed. "They are afraid of you," Beatrice said one evening as they sat by the fire, her hands busy with mending while Wade cleaned his rifle. "Fear is not respect," Wade replied, running an oiled cloth down the barrel, "but sometimes it is enough to keep folks civil." "Is that how you want to live, keeping people civil through fear?" He looked up at her, those blue eyes reflecting firelight. "I spent 5 years alone, Beatrice. Running from town to town, never staying long enough to make a friend or have a conversation that mattered. I ate meals in silence and slept with one eye open. So if fear buys me a few months of sitting by a fire with someone who talks to me like I am human, then yes, that is exactly how I want to live." The honesty in his words made her chest tight. She set down her mending and moved to sit beside him on the floor, close enough that their shoulders touched. "You are human," she said softly, "and you are a good man, Wade Sullivan. Whatever you did 5 years ago, you have more than paid for it. The law might disagree. Then the law is wrong." They sat in silence for a while, comfortable in each other's presence in a way that felt both new and ancient. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the shutters, but inside it was warm and safe and peaceful. "Tell me about your mother," Wade said eventually. "You said this cabin was hers." Beatrice smiled, remembering. "She was beautiful and kind and far too good for my father, though she never seemed to realize it. She loved this cabin, loved the view of the mountains from the porch. She planted a garden every spring, even though the growing season was short and the soil was rocky. Said that growing things kept her grounded, kept her hopeful. You look like her, people said so. She had dark hair like mine and she was small like me, but she had a strength I do not think I inherited. She held her head high even when my father's drinking got bad, even when the creditors came knocking. It was only after he stole from the church collection that she finally broke. She got sick that winter, just wasted away like she had given up on living." Wade's hand found hers in the firelight, his calloused fingers wrapping around her smaller ones. "You have that strength," he said. "I have seen it. You took in a stranger during a blizzard when you barely had enough for yourself. You have survived 3 years of this town's cruelty without letting it poison you. That takes more strength than holding your head high." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness but from the sheer relief of being seen, really seen, by someone who understood. She turned her hand in his, lacing their fingers together, and they stayed that way until the fire burned low. As February turned to March, the cold maintained its iron grip on the Black Hills, but something else was thawing. The careful distance that Wade and Beatrice had maintained began to dissolve like snow in spring sunshine, replaced by something warmer, something that made Beatrice's heart race whenever Wade smiled at her, whenever their hands brushed in passing. She caught herself watching him as he worked, admiring the way his muscles moved beneath his shirt as he split wood, the concentration on his face when he repaired a broken chair leg. She noticed the way his eyes sought her out across the room, the way he always seemed to position himself between her and the door when they had visitors, as if his body could be a shield against the world's cruelty. They were sitting at her small table one evening in mid-March, sharing a meal of salt pork and beans, when Wade suddenly reached across and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, that Beatrice froze with her spoon halfway to her mouth. "Sorry," Wade said, pulling his hand back. "You had flour in your hair, from the biscuits." "Oh," Beatrice managed, her cheek burning where his fingers had grazed her skin. "Thank you." But neither of them moved to continue eating. They simply sat there, looking at each other across the table, and Beatrice could see in his eyes what she felt in her own heart. This was no longer about hospitality or convenience or survival. This was something deeper, something dangerous, something wonderful. "Beatrice," Wade said, his voice rough with emotion. "I should tell you." A knock at the door interrupted him. They both jumped, the moment shattering like glass. Beatrice rose to answer it, her heart still pounding, and found herself face to face with a woman she barely recognized. Eleanor Matthews was the wife of the town's most successful merchant and the undisputed queen of Deadwood's social circle. She was dressed in her finest, despite the muddy streets, her face pinched with the perpetual expression of someone smelling something unpleasant. Beatrice had not spoken to her directly in 3 years. "Mrs. Matthews," Beatrice said, too surprised to hide her shock. "What can I do for you?" Eleanor's eyes flicked past Beatrice to where Wade had stood up from the table, his hand instinctively moving toward his gun belt. "I've come on behalf of the Church Ladies' Auxiliary," she said, her voice tight. "We are organizing a social for Easter Sunday and require all able-bodied women to contribute baked goods." Beatrice blinked. "You want me to bake for the church social?" "We want everyone to contribute," Eleanor corrected, as if there were an important distinction. "2 pies or 1 cake delivered to the church by Saturday evening." "I see." Beatrice did not know what to say. This was the same church that had barred its doors to her father's funeral, the same congregation that had cut her dead on the street. "And if I refuse?" Eleanor's face tightened further. "Then I suppose we will know where you stand in regards to the community's well-being." It was not an olive branch, Beatrice realized. It was a test. They wanted to see if she would jump when they called, if 3 years of exile had broken her enough to be grateful for scraps of inclusion. And 6 months ago, she might have refused out of pride, might have told Eleanor Matthews exactly where she could put her church social. But that was before Wade. Before she had learned that sometimes accepting help was not weakness, that sometimes you had to swallow your pride to survive. And more than that, she could feel Wade watching her, could sense him ready to step in and defend her if she needed it. But she did not need defending. She needed to show both of them that she could navigate this town's politics without burning bridges. 2 pies, Beatrice said calmly. "I will have them to the church by Saturday evening." Eleanor looked almost disappointed, as if she had been hoping for a fight. "See that you do," she said, then turned and picked her way carefully back down the muddy path toward town. Beatrice closed the door and leaned against it, feeling drained. Wade crossed to her immediately, his hands hovering near her shoulders as if he wanted to touch her but was not sure if he should. "You do not have to bake anything for those hypocrites," he said fiercely. "They have treated you like dirt for years." "I know," Beatrice replied. "But Wade, things have been easier since you came. The shopkeeper sells to me at fair prices now. The hotel manager actually paid me for the washing I did last week instead of finding reasons to dock my wages. It is not much, but it is more than I have had in 3 years. Maybe if I play along with their games, if I show them I can be part of the community, things will keep getting better." Wade's jaw tightened, but he nodded. "You are probably right. I just hate seeing you have to prove yourself to people who should be begging your forgiveness." She reached up and touched his face, feeling bold in the aftermath of Eleanor's visit. "You are a good man, Wade Sullivan." His hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his cheek. "I am trying to be, for you." The moment stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words and feelings too new to name. Then Wade stepped back, breaking the contact, and Beatrice felt the loss like a physical ache. "I should check on the horse," he said, not meeting her eyes. "Wade, I will be back before dark." He grabbed his coat and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Beatrice stood alone in her cabin, her hands still tingling from the warmth of his skin, and wondered how much longer they could keep dancing around what they both clearly felt. The next few days passed in a flurry of baking. Beatrice used precious supplies to make 2 apple pies, carefully crimping the crusts and brushing them with melted butter until they gleamed. Wade watched from the table, whittling a new handle for her broken broom, offering suggestions and praise as she worked. Saturday evening they walked into town together, the pies wrapped carefully in cloth and nested in a basket. The church stood at the center of Deadwood, a white-painted building with a steeple that reached toward heaven like a finger pointing in accusation. Beatrice had not been inside since her mother's funeral, and her steps slowed as they approached. Wade noticed immediately. "We can turn around," he said softly. "Throw the pies in the creek and go home." She almost laughed at the image. "No," she said. "I can do this." The church doors were open, light and voices spilling out into the gathering dusk. Inside, women bustled about arranging tables and laying out goods. Beatrice recognized most of them, women who had been her mother's friends once, who had brought casseroles when her father had been on a bender, who had helped with the washing after her mother got sick. Women who had abandoned her the moment she became an inconvenience. Eleanor Matthews stood near the altar, directing traffic with the authority of a general. She spotted Beatrice and Wade and came sweeping over, her eyes immediately going to the basket. "Mrs. Matthews," Beatrice said, holding out the pies. "As promised." Eleanor lifted the cloth, inspecting the pies with a critical eye. For a moment, Beatrice thought she might actually find something to complain about, but the pies were perfect, golden and fragrant, and even Eleanor Matthews could not deny it. "Acceptable," she said finally, taking the basket. "You may go," dismissed like a servant. Beatrice felt her face flush with humiliation, felt Wade tense beside her, his hand moving toward his gun in an unconscious gesture of protection. She put a hand on his arm, squeezing gently, warning him not to make a scene. "Actually," a voice said from behind them, "I was hoping Beatrice might stay and help serve tomorrow." They turned to find Reverend John Henry standing there, a kind smile on his weathered face. He was an old man, pushing 70, who had come to Deadwood 5 years ago to shepherd a flock that mostly did not want shepherding. Beatrice had always liked him, even after the church ladies had frozen her out. "Reverend," Eleanor said, her voice sharp, "we have plenty of help already." "Nevertheless, I would like Miss Crawford to participate." His voice was gentle but firm. "It is Easter, after all, a time for forgiveness and new beginnings." The rebuke was subtle but unmistakable. Eleanor's face reddened, but she could not argue with the reverend in his own church. "As you wish," she said tightly, then swept away to torment someone else. "You do not have to stay," Reverend Henry said to Beatrice, his voice lower now. "I just thought you might like the option. The offer is genuine if you want it." Beatrice looked at Wade, who gave her a small nod, leaving the decision to her. She thought about her mother, who had loved this church despite everything, who had believed in community and fellowship and the better angels of human nature. She thought about the girl she had been before her father's sins became her own, the girl who had sung in the choir and helped organize potlucks and believed that Deadwood was her home. "I would like that," she heard herself say. "Thank you, Reverend. Excellent. Come by after the service tomorrow, around noon." He smiled at them both, then moved off to greet other arrivals. Wade and Beatrice walked home in silence, the empty basket swinging between them. The night was clear and cold, stars spread across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, a lonely sound that echoed off the mountains. "Are you angry with me?" Beatrice asked finally when they were halfway home. "Angry? Why would I be angry? For staying. For accepting the Reverend's offer. I know you do not like the way they treat me." Wade stopped walking and turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. Beatrice, you can make your own choices. I do not have any right to be angry about what you decide to do. I am not your keeper or your judge, but you are my friend. I hope I am more than that, he said quietly, her breath caught. What? Wade reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palms. I am no good at pretty words, he said. I have spent 5 years alone, and before that, I was running with men who thought feelings were something to be mocked. But Beatrice, these past 2 months have been the happiest of my life. Not because of the roof over my head or the food in my belly, but because of you. Your kindness, your strength, your laugh when something surprises you. I think about you every moment of every day, and when I am near you, I feel like maybe I could be the man you deserve instead of the outlaw I became. Tears spilled down Beatrice's cheeks, warm against her cold skin. Wade, you are already the man I need. You have been since the moment you did not judge me for being alone, for being the town outcast. You looked at me like I mattered, like I was more than my father's sins. No one has done that in 3 years. You matter more than you know, Wade said fiercely. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met. And he stopped, swallowed hard. I love you, Beatrice Crawford. I know I have no right to. I know I am a wanted man with nothing to offer but trouble, but I love you and I needed you to know it. She was kissing him before she even realized she had moved, standing on her toes to press her lips to his. He made a surprised sound, then pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until Beatrice felt like she might melt right into the snow. His arms wrapped around her, strong and sure, and she felt safer than she had in years. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Wade rested his forehead against hers. So I am guessing you feel the same way, Beatrice laughed, giddy and breathless. I love you too, you foolish man. I have loved you since you told me some ghosts are best left undisturbed, since you held my hand by the fire, since you made me feel like I was worth saving. You saved me first, Wade reminded her. Literally dragged me out of the snow. Then I suppose we are even. They stood there in the moonlight, holding each other, while the wind whispered through the pines and the stars wheeled overhead. For the first time in longer than either of them could remember, the future felt like something to look forward to rather than something to fear. Easter Sunday dawned clear and warm, the first real hint that spring might actually come. The snow was melting in earnest now, turning the streets of Deadwood into rivers of mud, but the sunshine felt like a benediction after months of cold. Beatrice dressed in her best dress, the calico that had been her mother's, and Wade surprised her by producing a jacket she had never seen before, dark brown wool with brass buttons. Where did that come from? She asked. I have been saving it, he said, looking almost embarrassed. Bought it in Cheyenne before everything went bad. Never had anywhere nice enough to wear it. You look handsome, Beatrice said, and meant it. The jacket fit him perfectly, emphasizing his broad shoulders and narrow waist. With his hair combed back and his face freshly shaved, he looked like a different man from the half-frozen drifter she had pulled from the snow. They walked to church together, Wade's hand at the small of her back, a gesture of support and possession that made Beatrice's heart sing. The service was well attended, nearly the whole town packed into the pews, and Beatrice could feel eyes on them as they took seats near the back. She kept her chin up, refused to let the whispers and stares make her shrink. Reverend Henry's sermon was about forgiveness and redemption, about the possibility of change and the importance of grace. Beatrice wondered if he had written it specifically for her benefit, but looking around at the congregation, she saw several people shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Maybe they all needed to hear it. After the service, while Wade waited outside with the other men, Beatrice reported to the church basement where the social was being held. Long tables had been set up and covered with white cloths, and her pies sat among dozens of others, anonymous and accepted. Alina Matthews put her to work serving punch, a safe task that kept her away from the more important jobs like greeting guests or managing the children's egg hunt. Beatrice did not mind. She served punch with a smile, exchanged pleasantries with people who had not spoken to her in years, and felt something loosen in her chest. It was not acceptance, not really. Most of the women still regarded her with suspicion, still whispered behind their hands when they thought she could not hear. But it was a start, a tiny crack in the wall that had surrounded her for so long. Wade appeared at some point, claiming a cup of punch and giving her a smile that made her toes curl in her boots. "How is it going?" "Better than expected," she admitted. "No one has thrown anything at me yet. The day is young." She laughed, then sobered as she saw Alina Matthews bearing down on them, her expression even more pinched than usual. Beatrice braced herself for criticism or dismissal, but Alina swept past her entirely, her attention fixed on Wade. "Mr. Sullivan," she said, her voice tight. "My husband would like a word with you in his office." Wade's expression went carefully blank. "About what?" "I am sure I do not know. He simply asked me to fetch you." Alina's eyes were cold. "He is waiting at the mercantile." Beatrice felt fear clutch at her stomach. Joseph Matthews was the wealthiest man in Deadwood, with connections to the territorial government and the marshal's office. If he wanted to speak to Wade, it could not be good. "I will come with you," Beatrice said quickly. "That will not be necessary," Alina said. "This is business between men." "Nevertheless, I am coming." Wade squeezed her hand briefly, a silent thank you, then followed Alina out of the church basement. Beatrice untied her apron and went after them, ignoring the surprised looks from the other women. The mercantile was only 2 blocks from the church, a large building that dominated Main Street. Joseph Matthews stood behind the counter, a portly man with shrewd eyes and an impressive mustache. He looked up as they entered, his gaze going immediately to Wade. "Mr. Sullivan," he said, his voice neutral. "Thank you for coming, Miss Crawford. I did not expect you." "Where he goes, I go," Beatrice said firmly. Joseph's eyebrows rose slightly, but he nodded. "Very well. Mr. Sullivan, I have a proposition for you." "What kind of proposition?" Wade asked, his body tense, ready for trouble. "I have recently acquired a ranch about 10 miles north of town. 2,000 acres, good grazing land, a solid house and barn. I need someone to manage it, someone who knows horses and cattle and is not afraid of hard work. The pay would be $40 a month, plus room and board." Beatrice felt her heart leap with hope, but Wade's expression remained guarded. "Why me? You do not know anything about me." "On the contrary, I know quite a bit." Joseph pulled out a familiar piece of paper from behind the counter. Wade's wanted poster. Beatrice felt the blood drain from her face. "Now, before you run," Joseph continued calmly, "let me explain. That bank you robbed in Cheyenne 5 years ago, that was my brother-in-law's bank. The robbery nearly ruined him, and I have been keeping an eye out for anyone matching your description ever since." "Then why not turn me in?" Wade asked, his voice hard. "That is a $500 reward." "Because my brother-in-law is also a fool who drove his own bank into the ground with bad investments. The robbery just sped up the inevitable. And because in the 2 months you have been in Deadwood, you have not caused a lick of trouble. You work hard, you keep to yourself, and you have been good for Miss Crawford here." Joseph glanced at Beatrice, and something like approval flickered in his eyes. "Anyone who can earn her loyalty is worth a second look." "I do not understand," Beatrice said. "Why offer him a job? Why not just leave him alone?" "Because a man with a wanted poster hanging over his head is desperate, and desperate men make stupid choices. But a man with honest work and a reason to stay put might just decide that his running days are over. Joseph looked back at Wade. "I am offering you a chance to stop running, Mr. Sullivan. A chance to build something legitimate. All I ask in return is your word that your outlaw days are behind you." Wade stared at the merchant for a long moment, and Beatrice could see him wrestling with the offer, trying to find the trap. But there was no trap, at least none that she could see. Joseph Matthews was offering exactly what it appeared to be, a chance at redemption. "My word," Wade said finally, "that I am done with that life. But what about the law? What happens when a marshal comes through town and recognizes me?" "Leave that to me," Joseph said. "I have some influence with the territorial government. It might take some time, but I believe I can arrange for your record to be cleared, or at least overlooked. Can't promise anything, but I will do my best." "Why?" Wade asked bluntly. "Why go to all this trouble for a stranger?" Joseph was quiet for a moment, his gaze drifting to the window where the Easter social was breaking up, families walking home in the spring sunshine. "Because 20 years ago, I was young and stupid and got caught up in some trouble that could have ended very badly. But someone gave me a second chance, helped me get clear of it, and I have spent every day since trying to earn that grace. Maybe this is my chance to pass it along." Beatrice felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent so long being judged, being condemned for sins that were not her own, that she had almost forgotten that mercy existed in the world. And here was this man, this practical merchant with his ledgers and his shrewd business sense, offering them both a lifeline. "What do you say, Mr. Sullivan?" Joseph asked. "Do we have a deal?" Wade looked at Beatrice, and she saw her own hope reflected in his eyes. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "We have a deal," Wade said, extending his hand. Joseph shook it firmly, sealing the bargain. "Excellent. You can start next week. I will have my foreman show you the property, introduce you to the hands who will be working under you. Miss Crawford, you are welcome to come along, see the place for yourself." "Thank you," Beatrice managed. "Thank you so much, Mr. Matthews." "Call it enlightened self-interest," Joseph said with a slight smile. "A well-managed ranch will make me money after all. Now go on, both of you. Enjoy what is left of Easter." They walked back to Beatrice's cabin in a daze, neither quite able to believe what had just happened. The future, which had seemed so uncertain that morning, had suddenly opened up before them like a flower blooming. "A ranch," Wade said wonderingly as they reached the porch. "Legitimate work, decent pay, a place to call home." "It is more than that," Beatrice said. "It is freedom. Freedom from running, freedom from fear." Wade pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I could not have done this without you," he said into her hair. "You saved me, Beatrice, not just from freezing to death, but from a life that was no life at all. We saved each other," she corrected, "and we will build this new life together." They stood on the porch as the sun sank toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Inside the cabin, the fire had burned down to embers, but neither of them moved to tend it. They were warm enough in each other's arms. The following week, Wade and Beatrice rode out to see the ranch that would become their home. It was everything Joseph Matthews had promised, a sprawling property with good grass and clean water, nestled in a valley with the Black Hills rising all around. The house was solid, built of logs with a stone chimney, much larger than Beatrice's cabin. The barn was in good repair, and there were half a dozen ranch hands already working the property, preparing for spring calving. Wade took to the work like he had been born to it. He knew horses and cattle, knew the rhythms of ranch life, and the men respected him immediately. Beatrice found herself drawn into the work as well, cooking for the hands, managing the household, even helping with the spring planting of a vegetable garden. They moved into the house at the end of April, leaving Beatrice's cabin behind. It felt strange at first, living together without the sanctity of marriage, but they were far enough from town that no one seemed to care. And besides, Wade had other plans. On a warm evening in early May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Wade suddenly dropped to one knee before her. Beatrice's breath caught, her hands flying to her mouth. "I do not have a ring," Wade said, his voice rough with emotion. "And I know I am not the man any woman dreams of marrying. I am a wanted man trying to outrun his past, an outlaw hoping for redemption. But Beatrice Crawford, you are the only good thing that has ever happened to me, and I swear on everything I hold dear that I will spend every day of my life trying to be worthy of you. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Beatrice said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Wade stood and swept her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that made her dizzy. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he pressed his forehead to hers. "I will get you a ring," he promised, "the best ring I can afford." "I do not need a ring," Beatrice said. "I just need you." They were married 3 weeks later in the same church where Beatrice had served punch at the Easter social. Reverend Henry performed the ceremony, and to Beatrice's surprise, nearly half the town showed up. Joseph Matthews and his wife sat in the front row, beaming like proud parents. Even Alina Matthews had come, though she still looked like she was smelling something unpleasant. Beatrice wore a new dress, pale blue calico that Wade had bought for her in Rapid City, and she carried wildflowers that she had picked that morning from the meadow behind the ranch house. Wade wore his brown wool jacket and looked so handsome that Beatrice could barely keep her eyes off him. When Reverend Henry pronounced them man and wife, Wade kissed her like a dying man finding water, and the congregation erupted in applause. As they walked back down the aisle together, Beatrice caught sight of herself in the church's window, reflected in the glass. She looked happy, radiant even, nothing like the broken outcast who had dragged a freezing drifter from the snow 5 months ago. The reception was held at the ranch, a simple affair with food and music and dancing under the stars. The ranch hands had built a bonfire and someone had brought a fiddle, and as Beatrice danced with her new husband, she felt like she was floating. "Happy?" Wade asked, spinning her around. "Deliriously," Beatrice replied, laughing. "I never imagined I could feel like this." "Neither did I," Wade admitted. "I thought happiness was something other people had, something I had given up my right to. But then you appeared in my life like a miracle." "You appeared in mine," Beatrice corrected. "Half frozen and nearly dead, but a miracle nonetheless." They danced until the fire burned low and the guests began drifting home. Finally, alone on their porch with the stars wheeling overhead, Wade lifted Beatrice in his arms and carried her across the threshold of their home, their future stretching out before them like the endless prairie. The summer that followed was the happiest of Beatrice's life. The ranch thrived under Wade's management, the cattle fattening on good grass, the horses multiplying. Joseph Matthews visited regularly, always pleased with the progress they were making, and true to his word, he was working with his contacts to get Wade's record cleared. Beatrice found her own place in the rhythm of ranch life. She kept the books, managed the household, and started a garden that would have made her mother proud. She also began taking and mending again, but this time it was different. The ranchers' wives who brought her their sewing treated her with respect, even friendship. She was no longer the town outcast, but Mrs. Sullivan, wife of the capable ranch manager, and the difference was stark. In late July, Joseph Matthews arrived with news that made them both sink into their porch chairs in relief. The territorial governor, after hearing Wade's story and receiving multiple character references from prominent citizens of Deadwood, had agreed to pardon him for the bank robbery. The wanted poster that had followed Wade for 5 years was no more than a piece of paper now, powerless to harm him. "You are free," Joseph said, handing Wade the official document. "Truly free, with no more looking over your shoulder." Wade stared at the pardon, his hands shaking slightly. "I do not know how to thank you," he said finally. "You have given me my life back." "You earned it," Joseph replied. "You and Mrs. Sullivan both. You have proven that people can change, that mistakes do not have to define us forever. That is worth more than any thanks." After Joseph left, Wade and Beatrice sat on their porch for a long time, watching the sun set over the mountains. Wade kept touching the pardon like he could not quite believe it was real, and Beatrice kept touching him, reassuring herself that this was not a dream. "What do you want to do now?" she asked finally. "Now that you are free to go anywhere, do anything," Wade looked at her, those blue eyes she loved so much shining with emotion. "I want to stay right here," he said. "I want to build this ranch into something we can be proud of. I want to grow old with you, raise children with you, wake up every morning knowing that I am the luckiest man alive. That is all I want, Beatrice. You and this life we are building together." She kissed him then, pouring all her love and hope and joy into the embrace. When they finally broke apart, the stars were beginning to appear, pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. "Then that is what we will do," Beatrice said. "Together." The seasons turned, summer giving way to fall and then to winter again. But this winter was nothing like the one that had brought them together. This winter, Beatrice and Wade were snug in their solid house with a full larder and plenty of wood. This winter, they had each other and a future that looked brighter than any sunrise. In March of 1879, exactly 1 year after Wade had asked her to marry him, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant. She told him over breakfast, watching nervously as surprise, joy, and terror chased each other across his face. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Beatrice asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Wade replied, coming around the table to kneel beside her chair. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Terrified, yes, but happy beyond words. You are giving me everything I never knew I wanted." Beatrice Sullivan. Their daughter was born in early December, arriving with the first snowfall of the season. They named her Grace, for the grace that had brought them together, the grace that had given them both second chances. She was perfect, with dark hair like Beatrice and blue eyes like Wade, and she had lungs that could wake the dead when she wanted feeding. Reverend Henry came to the ranch to baptize her on Christmas Day, and half the town showed up to celebrate. Looking around at the gathered faces, at the friends and neighbors who had once shunned her, Beatrice marveled at how much had changed in 2 short years. Eleanor Matthews, of all people, brought a gift for the baby, a beautifully crocheted blanket that must have taken weeks to make. She even smiled at Beatrice, a real smile without the usual pinched expression. "She is beautiful," Eleanor said, peering at Grace sleeping in Beatrice's arms. "You must be very proud." "We are," Beatrice replied, still surprised to be having a civil conversation with this woman. "Thank you for the blanket. It is lovely." Eleanor hesitated, then said quietly, "I owe you an apology, Beatrice. I was cruel to you for a very long time and you did not deserve it. I let the town's prejudices become my own and I am sorry for that." Beatrice felt tears prick at her eyes. "That means more than you know," she said softly. "Thank you." The 2 women looked at each other for a moment, acknowledging the bridge being built between them. Then Eleanor moved on to admire the Christmas tree that Wade had cut and dragged home for the occasion. As the party continued around her, Beatrice sat by the fire with her daughter and watched Wade laugh with Joseph Matthews and some of the other ranchers. He looked so different from the half-frozen drifter she had pulled from the snow 2 years ago. He was healthy and happy, his laugh coming easily, his shoulders no longer burdened with the weight of running. He caught her eye across the room and smiled, that special smile he reserved just for her, and Beatrice felt her heart swell with love. This was what Grace looked like, she thought. This house full of friends, this man she loved, this child sleeping peacefully in her arms. This was the life her kindness had bought them, the life his determination to change had secured. They had taken their broken pieces and forged them into something beautiful, something lasting. The years flowed by like water, each one bringing new joys and challenges. Grace grew into a bright, curious toddler who followed her father everywhere, mimicking his stride and his serious expressions. Wade proved to be a natural father, patient and loving, always ready with a story or a game. In the spring of 1881, Beatrice gave birth to their son, whom they named William after Wade's grandfather, the only member of his family he remembered with any fondness. William had his father's dark hair and his mother's smile, and he completed their family in a way that felt perfect. The ranch continued to prosper. Wade's reputation as a fair and capable manager spread, and soon other ranchers were seeking his advice on everything from breeding stock to water rights. Joseph Matthews, pleased with his investment, began buying more land, expanding the operation until it was one of the largest ranches in the territory. In recognition of Wade's contributions, Joseph made him a partner in the ranch in the fall of 1882, giving him a 20% stake in the profits. It was more money than Wade and Beatrice had ever dreamed of having, and they used it wisely, investing in improvements to the ranch and setting aside a fund for their children's future. Beatrice, for her part, became increasingly involved in the Deadwood community. She joined the Church Ladies' Auxiliary, no longer as an outcast forced to prove herself, but as an equal and respected member. She organized fundraisers for the new schoolhouse, taught Sunday school, and became known as someone who could be counted on in times of trouble. When a fire destroyed the home of a family on the outskirts of town in the winter of 1883, it was Beatrice who organized the relief effort, collecting donations and coordinating the rebuilding. When the schoolteacher fell ill, Beatrice stepped in to teach for 3 months until a replacement could be found. She had become, in the most unexpected way, a pillar of the community that had once rejected her. But she never forgot where she had come from. She never forgot the cold and the hunger and the loneliness of being the town outcast. And because she remembered, she made it her mission to ensure that no one else in Deadwood felt that same abandonment. When a young widow showed up in town with 2 small children and nowhere to go, Beatrice was the first to offer help, finding her work and a place to stay. When the Chinese laborers who had helped build the railroad faced harassment and discrimination, Beatrice spoke up at town meetings, reminding people of the Christian values they claimed to hold dear. She did not always win these battles, but she fought them anyway, because she knew what it was like to be on the receiving end of cruelty. Wade supported her in all of this, proud of his wife's compassion and courage. He had found his own way to give back to the community, serving on the town council and helping to establish fair labor practices for the ranches in the area. Together, they became known as a couple who could be counted on, who cared about more than just their own prosperity. On their 5th wedding anniversary in May of 1884, Wade surprised Beatrice with a gift that made her cry. It was her mother's cabin, fully restored and expanded, turned into a school for children whose families could not afford the fees charged by the main schoolhouse. Wade had been working on it in secret for months, enlisting the help of ranch hands and townspeople, and when he led Beatrice to it with her eyes closed, revealing the transformation, she wept with joy. "My mother would have loved this," she said, throwing her arms around him. She always believed in education, always thought it was the key to a better life. "Then we will make sure every child in Deadwood who wants an education can get one," Wade replied, "no matter what their family's circumstances." The school opened that fall, with Beatrice teaching 3 days a week and a newly hired teacher covering the other days. They charged no fees, operating on donations from the community and the generous support of Joseph Matthews and other wealthy ranchers. It was not easy work, and there were always financial struggles, but they made it happen. By 1885, Grace was 6 years old and begging to attend the school her mother had founded. Beatrice enrolled her alongside children from all walks of life, from the offspring of wealthy merchants to the sons and daughters of saloon girls and miners. It was exactly what her mother would have wanted, a place where every child was equal and valued. William, now 4, was not quite old enough for school but spent his days helping his father around the ranch. He was fascinated by the horses, showing an early aptitude for handling them that made Wade swell with pride. Father and son were inseparable, and watching them together made Beatrice's heart ache with happiness. The years continued to pass, marked by birthdays and Christmases, by summer roundups and winter storms. Grace grew into a thoughtful, kind young girl who loved books and showed a gift for teaching that mirrored her mother's. William became an expert horseman, able to ride before he could properly read, with his father's natural seat and gentle hands. In 1888, when Grace was 10 and William was 8, Beatrice discovered she was pregnant again. It was a surprise, as they had thought their family complete, but a welcome one. This time, she gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl they named Thomas and Sarah. The babies were healthy and loud, filling the house with chaos and joy in equal measure. Wade, now 36 years old, took to being a father of 4 with the same steady competence he brought to everything. He built additions onto the house to accommodate their growing family, installed a modern stove that Beatrice had admired in a catalog, and somehow still found time to manage the ranch and serve on the town council. They were happy, deeply and profoundly happy, in a way that neither of them had ever expected to be. The wanted poster that had once defined Wade's life was a distant memory, the town's condemnation of Beatrice a faded nightmare. They had built something real and lasting, a family and a legacy that would endure. On a warm evening in June of 1890, as they sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard, Wade reached over and took Beatrice's hand. "You remember the night we met?" he asked. Beatrice smiled. "Of course. You were half frozen and stubborn as a mule, refusing to admit you were dying." "I was not that bad." "You absolutely were. I had to drag you through the snow because you could not walk." Wade laughed, that warm, genuine laugh that still made Beatrice's heart skip. "I suppose I was a bit dramatic, but I am glad I collapsed in front of your cabin and not someone else's. Anyone else would have left me to freeze." "I could not do that," Beatrice said. "No matter what the town thought of me, I could not leave another human being to die in the snow." "That compassion saved both our lives," Wade said seriously. "Mine literally, yours in a different way. You were dying too, Beatrice, just more slowly, dying of loneliness and despair. We saved each other." She squeezed his hand, her eyes damp with emotion. "We did. And we built something beautiful from those broken pieces." Grace called out then, something about William cheating at their game, and Beatrice rose to mediate. But before she could step off the porch, Wade pulled her back, turning her to face him. "I love you," he said, cupping her face in his hands. I have loved you from the moment you refused to give up on me, and I will love you until my last breath. Thank you for seeing something worth saving in a half-frozen outlaw. Thank you for giving me this life. Thank you for giving me a reason to hope again, Beatrice replied, tears streaming freely now. Thank you for your name, your love, your children. Thank you for making me feel like I belonged somewhere. They kissed then, a long, sweet kiss that tasted of happiness and promises kept. When they finally broke apart, their children were all staring at them with various expressions of amusement and disgust. Father is kissing mother again, Thomas announced to his twin. Grown-ups are weird, Sarah agreed. Beatrice and Wade laughed, and the sound carried across the valley, mixing with the evening birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. This was home, this was family, this was the life they had built together from nothing but kindness and courage and love. The seasons continued their eternal dance, and the Sullivan family grew and prospered. Grace became a teacher at the school her mother had founded, following in Beatrice's footsteps with a natural grace and authority. William took over much of the daily management of the ranch as Wade gradually stepped back, allowing his son to find his own way while remaining available for advice. The twins, Thomas and Sarah, were inseparable and adventurous, always getting into some scrape or another. Thomas wanted to be a veterinarian, fascinated by animal medicine in a way that had Wade consulting with every horse doctor and cattle specialist who passed through the territory. Sarah dreamed of being a writer, filling notebook after notebook with stories and observations about ranch life. In 1895, when Grace was 17, she married a young schoolteacher from Rapid City, a kind man named Daniel who reminded Beatrice strongly of Wade in his quiet strength and gentle nature. The wedding was held at the ranch, with half of Deadwood in attendance, and Beatrice cried through the entire ceremony. "Our little girl is all grown up," she whispered to Wade as they watched Grace dance with her new husband. "She is," Wade agreed, his arm tight around Beatrice's waist. "But she will always be our little girl, no matter how old she gets." William married 2 years later, choosing a rancher's daughter from up near Belle Fourche, a strong, capable woman named Catherine who could ride and rope as well as any man. They settled in a house Wade built for them on the far edge of the ranch property, close enough to help with the work but far enough to have their own space. The twins showed no signs of settling down, both too caught up in their respective passions to think about marriage. Thomas was studying with a veterinarian in Deadwood, learning everything he could about animal care. Sarah had actually sold a story to a magazine in New York, a humorous piece about ranch life that had the whole family beaming with pride. In the summer of 1900, Joseph Matthews died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78. His death hit Wade hard, as the older man had become like a father to him over the years. At the funeral, Wade gave a eulogy that had the entire church in tears, talking about second chances and the importance of seeing the potential in people, rather than just their mistakes. Joseph Matthews looked at a wanted outlaw and saw a ranch manager, Wade said, his voice thick with emotion. He looked at a town pariah and saw a valuable member of the community. He taught me that grace is not just a word, it is an action, and that every person deserves a chance at redemption. I owe him everything, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to pay forward the gift he gave me. Beatrice sat in the front pew, holding Wade's hand when he returned to his seat, and thought about all the ways their lives had been shaped by one man's willingness to see beyond the surface. Joseph's legacy lived on in the thriving ranch, in the school that educated hundreds of children, in the family that Beatrice and Wade had built together. In his will, Joseph left the ranch entirely to Wade, no longer a partnership but full ownership. It was a staggering gift, making the Sullivans one of the wealthiest families in the territory, but Wade and Beatrice did not let the money change them. They continued to live simply, continued to give generously, continued to be the same people they had always been. By 1902, Grace had given them 3 grandchildren, beautiful babies who brought new life and energy to the ranch. William and Catherine added 2 more grandchildren in 1903 and 1904, and suddenly, Beatrice found herself a grandmother 5 times over, a role she embraced with joy. The house was always full now, full of children and laughter and life. Beatrice watched her grandchildren play in the same meadows where her own children had played, watched them learn to ride the same horses, and marveled at the continuity of it all. Wade, now 50 years old, had finally allowed his hair to go gray rather than fighting it, and Beatrice thought he looked more handsome than ever. He moved a bit slower than he used to, his joints stiff on cold mornings, but he was still strong and vital, still the man she had fallen in love with all those years ago. On a crisp autumn evening in October of 1906, they celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party that seemed to include the entire town of Deadwood. The ranch was decorated with ribbons and flowers, tables groaned under the weight of food, and a band played dance music while the sun set over the mountains. Reverend Henry, now well into his 80s but still sharp as ever, gave a toast that had everyone laughing and crying in equal measure. When Beatrice Crawford dragged a half-frozen stranger from the snow 28 years ago, she could not have known she was rescuing her future husband, he said. But God works in mysterious ways, and sometimes the people we save end up saving us right back. These 2 have built a family, a business, and a legacy of generosity and grace that will echo through generations. Here is to 25 more years of love and happiness. Everyone raised their glasses, and Beatrice and Wade kissed to thunderous applause. As they danced together under the stars, Beatrice thought back to that freezing January night in 1878, to the sound of a horse collapsing in the snow, to the decision to step off her porch despite every reason to stay inside. "What are you thinking about?" Wade asked, guiding her through a turn. "That night you showed up," Beatrice replied. "How different our lives would be if I had chosen differently." "You could not have chosen differently," Wade said with certainty. "That compassion is in your bones, Beatrice. You would have saved me if I had been your worst enemy, because that is who you are. And you repaid that kindness 1,000 times over," Beatrice said. "You gave me your name, your love, your loyalty. You made me feel like I mattered." "You always mattered," Wade said fiercely. "You mattered before I showed up, and you would have mattered even if I had never come. But I am grateful every day that I did come, that I got to be the one who stood by your side while the world finally realized what I knew from the beginning, that you are extraordinary." They danced until the stars wheeled overhead and the band packed up their instruments. They danced until their grandchildren were asleep in various corners, and their children were yawning despite their best efforts to stay alert. They danced until it was just the 2 of them swaying in the moonlight, holding each other close, grateful for every moment they had been given. The years that followed were gentler, slower. Wade gradually turned over more of the ranch management to William, content to serve as an advisor rather than the boss. Beatrice reduced her teaching schedule, spending more time with her grandchildren and working on a project she had been contemplating for years. In 1910, at the age of 53, Beatrice published a book about her experiences growing up in Deadwood, about being the town outcast and finding redemption through love and community. She wrote about her father's sins and her mother's strength, about the cold winter night when a stranger collapsed on her doorstep, about building a life from broken pieces. The book was published by a small press out of Denver, but it found an audience hungry for stories of redemption and second chances. Letters poured in from readers all over the country, people who had faced their own struggles and found hope in Beatrice's words. Sarah helped her mother manage the correspondence, her own writing career blossoming under her mother's example. In 1912, Wade suffered a heart attack while working with a difficult horse. He survived, but the experience shook both of them badly. The doctor ordered rest and limited activity, and for the first time in his life, Wade had to accept that he was slowing down. They spent more time on the porch after that, watching the ranch operate without their direct involvement, watching their grandchildren grow, watching the seasons change. It was a peaceful time, a time of reflection and gratitude. On a warm June evening in 1915, as they sat in their usual spots with the sunset painting the sky in shades of fire, Beatrice took Wade's hand. "You have any regrets?" she asked. Wade thought about it for a long moment. "Only one," he said finally. "I wish I had been a better man sooner so I could have had more years with you." "We have had nearly 40 years," Beatrice pointed out. "That is more than most people get." "It is still not enough," Wade said, but he was smiling. "I could live 100 lifetimes with you and it would not be enough." "Then I suppose it is a good thing we have eternity," Beatrice replied. "Because I am not done with you yet, Wade Sullivan." He laughed, that warm, familiar sound that still made her heart skip after all these years. "Good. Because I am certainly not done with you." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank lower, painting the mountains in gold and shadow. Around them, their legacy lived and breathed. The ranch that Joseph Matthews had entrusted to Wade, now passed to William and thriving under his care. The school that Beatrice had founded, now educating a third generation of Deadwood children. The family they had built together, children and grandchildren who carried their values and their love forward into the future. In 1918, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary with a smaller, more intimate gathering. Grace and William were there with their families, the grandchildren now ranging from teenagers to young adults. Thomas had become the most sought-after veterinarian in the territory, and Sarah had published her first novel to critical acclaim. The twins were both still unmarried, devoted to their work, but happy in their independence. Beatrice looked around at the faces gathered on her porch, at the family she and Wade had created, and felt a profound sense of completion. This was what that cold January night in 1878 had been leading to, this abundance of love and life and connection. Wade caught her eye across the porch and smiled, that special smile reserved just for her, and she smiled back. After 40 years, they could still communicate without words, could still read each other's thoughts with a glance. As the party wound down and their children began herding sleepy grandchildren toward wagons and automobiles, Grace pulled Beatrice aside. "Mother," she said, her eyes bright with emotion, "I want you to know that you and Father gave me the greatest gift. You showed me what real love looks like, what partnership and respect and devotion mean. Because of you, I knew what to look for in a husband, and I found it. You gave me that." Beatrice hugged her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You gave us just as much," she said. "You and your brothers and sister, you are our greatest achievement. Not the ranch, not the money, not any of it. You are what matters." After everyone had left, and it was just the two of them again, Beatrice and Wade climbed the stairs to their bedroom slowly, both feeling the weight of their years. But when Wade took her in his arms, when he kissed her with the same passion he had shown on their wedding night 40 years ago, Beatrice felt young again. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "More today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "I love you too," Beatrice replied. "My rescuer," my partner, my heart. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had every night for 40 years, surrounded by the life they had built together. Wade Sullivan passed away peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1920, with Beatrice holding his hand. He was 68 years old, and he had lived long enough to see all his children settled, all his grandchildren thriving, and the ranch he had built into one of the most successful operations in South Dakota. At his funeral, the church was packed to overflowing, with people standing in the cold outside just to pay their respects. The man who had arrived in Deadwood as a wanted outlaw, who had collapsed in the snow outside the town pariah's cabin, had died as one of the most beloved and respected men in the territory. Beatrice gave the eulogy herself, her voice strong despite her grief. "My husband was not a perfect man," she said. "He made mistakes, big ones, and he carried the weight of them for most of his life. But Wade Sullivan was good and kind and brave in ways that had nothing to do with guns or cattle or any of that. He was brave enough to accept help when he needed it, brave enough to change his life completely, brave enough to love without reservation. He gave me his name when mine was worthless, gave me his heart when his own was broken, gave me a family when I thought I would die alone. And I will be grateful every remaining day of my life that a blizzard drove him to my door." After the funeral, after the mourners had departed, and the house had fallen quiet, Beatrice sat in Wade's favorite chair on the porch and let herself cry. She cried for the years they would not have together, for the grandchildren he would not see married, for the great-grandchildren he would never meet. She cried until she had no tears left, until the sun set and the stars came out and the night wrapped around her like a blanket. But in the morning, she woke with a sense of purpose. Wade would not want her to waste whatever time she had left in mourning. He would want her to keep living, keep loving, keep being the woman he had fallen in love with all those years ago. So Beatrice threw herself into life with renewed energy. She spent time with her children and grandchildren, teaching them the stories of her and Wade so that their love story would not be forgotten. She continued working at the school, now in her 60s, but still sharp and passionate about education. She finished writing a second book, this one a love letter to Wade and their 40 years together. In 1925, Beatrice became a great-grandmother when Grace's oldest son had a daughter. Holding that tiny baby, looking at her great-granddaughter's perfect face, Beatrice felt Wade's presence so strongly that she looked around expecting to see him. "You should be here for this," she whispered to the empty air. "You should be meeting your great-granddaughter." But even though Wade was gone, his legacy lived on in this child, in all the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren who carried his genes and his values forward into the future. He lived on in the ranch that still bore the Sullivan name, in the stories that were told about him, in the way his sons conducted business with integrity, and his daughters taught their children about kindness and second chances. Beatrice lived until 1932, dying at the age of 75, surrounded by 3 generations of the family she and Wade had created. Her funeral was as well attended as Wade's had been, a testament to the life she had lived and the people she had touched. They buried her next to Wade on a hill overlooking the ranch, under a large pine tree that Wade had always loved. The headstone was simple but elegant, reading, "Beatrice Crawford Sullivan, 1857–1932. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, she saved a life and built a legacy." Years later, when great-great-grandchildren would ask about the people buried under that pine tree, they would be told the story of how their great-great-grandmother had rescued a freezing drifter from the snow, how that drifter had become their great-great-grandfather, how love and kindness had built an empire of family and prosperity that continued to thrive generations later. The Sullivan Ranch continued to operate well into the 20th century, eventually becoming one of the largest and most successful ranches in South Dakota. The school that Beatrice founded educated thousands of children over the decades, eventually being absorbed into the public school system, but never losing its founding mission of providing education to all regardless of their circumstances. But more important than the buildings or the land or the money was the legacy of compassion and redemption that Beatrice and Wade had left behind. Their story became a reminder that people can change, that kindness matters, that love can transform even the most broken lives into something beautiful. On cold winter nights, when snow falls heavy on the Black Hills and the wind howls through the pines, some people say you can still feel their presence on that ranch. The love of a woman who refused to let a stranger die in the snow, and the devotion of a man who spent the rest of his life proving himself worthy of that kindness. Together, they built something that would endure long after they were gone, something that started with a simple act of compassion on a freezing January night in 1878, and that, more than anything, was the happily ever after they had earned.